Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. So today I'm going to do a thread response, and this is for, I think the guy's called Nick. His channel is called, careful with that, Axe Eugene. Not a Pink Floyd devoted channel, despite the name, but a good channel name. And he started this thread a while ago, and I've seen a few responses to this. I thought it was a really good idea, one of those ideas that hides in plain sight, really. I wish I'd thought of it. And I think it's called Mind the Gap. And it's to do with artists who, for some reason, had a long gap between two consecutive album releases. And I love this kind of thing. It gets you hunting along the shelves, looking for records, looking for stories. It got me thinking, you know, it's interesting how back in the 60s, it was very common or even expected for artists to release, well, back in the 60s, the Beatles used to bang out two albums a year. But then, you know, then it gradually went down to one album a year, one album every 2 years. And it really wasn't very common at all for artists to take very long over albums. It was years before that really started happening. You know, think of the 90s, bands like Radiohead started to take more time. You know, in the 60s, the Beatles even, I think they took 9 months between Revolver and Sgt. Pepper, which just seems crazy, doesn't it? So anyway, so yeah, I thought this was a really good idea. So what I've done, I think I've picked 10 artists and I've ranked them. So I'm going to start with the artist with the least number of years between releases, and I'm going to go up all the way to the number 1 slot. And without giving anything away, the artist that I've got at number 1 here took a staggering 19 years between records. So get your thinking caps on, see if you can work out who it is. Yeah, so I thought I'd give this a whirl and see where we get to. It's quite good fun, as I said, trying to work out what it is or why it was that these artists took so long. So I'm going to start out with a 4-year gap, and this is quite a well-known one. This is Roxy Music, and this is their album Sirens, which came out, I think, in 1975. It was I think it was their 5th record, wasn't it? After which they took a 4-year gap. I think it was might have been just because Brian Ferry wanted to launch a solo career. I don't know now, I don't remember whether the plan was always to get Roxy back together or whether he was trying out a solo career, a bit like Mick Jagger did in the 80s, tried a solo career, realised it wasn't going to work, and then got back with the band again. But anyway, 5 years later, Roxy did reconvene with pretty much the same lineup, nearly. I think Eddie Jobson didn't join up. They got Paul Carrack in. It was still Paul Thompson on drums for the record Manifesto, which had more of a dance groove to it, and I suppose kick-started a new phase of Roxy's career, which was going to see them moving further away from the art rock direction, I suppose, heading towards that smooth sound, which was to eventually culminate in Avalon, of course. But there we go, 4 years for Roxy Music. When they came back, interestingly, they started to take a more democratic approach to the songwriting. So Phil Manzanera and Andy Mackay started writing more songs, unlike the first 5 albums where I think it had been mainly Brian Ferry. So there we go, 4 years for Roxy Music, and they come in at number 10. So the next one, we've got 2 artists tying at 5 years, a 5-year gap, and the first one is quite a famous one. This is John Lennon, and this is the rock and roll album, I think most of which was actually recorded probably before Walls and Bridges, which had come out the previous year finally. Bit of a tangled history with this record. Phil Spector ran off with the tapes, etc, etc. It was a really mad time for John, coming out of his wilderness years, his long weekend, but a bit of a rough record really, not particularly great all the way through. But anyway, after this, of course, John then retired. He'd just become a father again to Sean Lennon, and he retreated behind the doors of the Dakota with Yoko Ono, and opinion is divided, I think, as to the extent to which he genuinely did stop playing music. There are all those stories that he put out, really, the fact that he'd hung his guitar on the wall and was now just baking bread and looking after Sean. But I think certain commentators have come forward to say that wasn't necessarily strictly true. But anyway, it was 5 years before John and Yoko, of course, teamed up for John's final album in his lifetime, Double Fantasy, which showed him planning a much more sedate furrow, really, expressing his feelings of domesticity and the joys of fatherhood, being back with Yoko again. A fine album in its way. The critics didn't love it at the time. And then, of course, John was taken from us, and that was it, really, apart from, well, there was the Milk and Honey posthumous release and a few other projects which Yoko shepherded into existence in later years, but this was the last we heard from John. So, you know, it's incredibly tragic. 5-year gap, he comes back, great big splash, you know, that first single, just like starting over, and, you know, great tracks like Watching the Wheels, and then, bam, that's the end of that. So, terrible. But I thought I would include him for 5 years. Now, tying with him at 5 years, we have this band who put out this record, The Stone Roses, in 1989, wasn't it? A bit of a cultural phenomenon, this record, really, and I don't think there was any way they were ever going to be able to follow it. I mean, they were young guys at the time, John Squire probably still in his early 20s, but this record made such a splash. It really defined that generation, that kind of baggy Manchester sound. Wonderful album. And then it took 5 years for the follow-up finally to materialise, and of course when it did, it was a big disappointment, the second coming. I was certainly very disappointed when this record came out. Well, I say very disappointed. I think it took a while for me to realise quite how disappointing it had been. I think when I first got it, I got it on CD when it first came out. I really wanted to like it, and I think it's still got its moments. And Breaking Into Heaven, the opening track, is a really interesting piece, actually. Driving South is good. 10-Story Love Song actually could have almost come from the first record. But the big track on here, I think, the big tune on here is Begging You, which is a great slice of tribal rock. But in general, it did disappoint. I think John Squire went off into a more classic rock direction, really, which I think let down a lot of the younger fans who maybe didn't have so much of a history with that kind of music. And it was much more of a kind of trad rock affair, really. Drugs swirling around the studio, the band not necessarily getting on all that well. They broke up not long after this, didn't they? But yeah, a 5-year gap, followed by inevitable disappointment, probably. As I said, there was no way that they were ever going to be able to match that debut. So there we go, we're on 5 years. So let's move on now to 7 years. And here we've got 3 artists tying at 7th place. So let's start out with this one. We'll start out with the Floyd, Momentary Lapse of Reason, which came out in 1987. There had been a gap, actually, between this one and the previous one, The Final Cut, which was, I think, 83. That was the final album with Roger Waters on, of course. This was the first to feature the David Gilmour line-up, the trio, and caused a huge rumpus in the industry. Lawsuits flying around, a major tour off the back of this, of course. I saw Floyd on this tour. Pretty spectacular, but there was a lot of bad blood flowing, and the album was, it was a lot compromised, really. David Gilmour worked with a few collaborators on here, Phil Manzanera, a couple of other people, trying to inject some sort of lyrical angle into it, which wasn't really his strong point. A lot of digital technology made it sound not particularly Floyd-like, but it was still a big record. And then, amazingly, it took 7 years for the next one to come up, The Division Bell, which was 1994. And I was thinking about this, thinking when Momentary Lapse of Reason came out, I was 16 when I went to see them at Manchester Main Road in 87. I was a 16-year-old lad. When the next album came out, I was 23. It's quite a big gap, isn't it, between 16 and 23? An awful lot had happened to me in the intervening time, but it's interesting how time telescopes. And when I look back now on this era, I think of these two records as maybe being, I don't know, maybe 2 years, 3 years apart. You know, the artwork, they seem of a piece in some way, but there was a big gap between them, and the story had moved on a lot in the intervening time. David Gilmour had remarried, he'd got a new wife, Polly Sampson, who wrote the lyrics for this record. Obviously there was still all the bad blood with Roger Waters, but Rick Wright played a greater part in this record, and arguably it was more of a Floydian effort, I suppose, but I actually prefer Momentary Lapse. I think that's a more concise album, really. Fewer annoying guitar solos. But anyway, 7 years for the Floyd. And then the next one let's do the Blue Nile next. It's coming in a joint 7th place with Pink Floyd. Great Scottish band, trio, from the 1980s. They put out a couple of wonderful albums, Walk Along the Rooftops, and then this record, Hats, which is 1989 on Lynn Records. I think there was a 5-year gap actually between their first and second record, but they were very influential. Strange sound really, a mixture of acoustic and electronic sounds, the wonderful singing of Paul Buchanan, isn't it? And very intimate songs, quite epic in their way and quite influential, I think. But Hats, 1989, and then the next album didn't come out until 7 years later, so I hope I got my maths right here. But this record kind of flies under the radar, really. I don't hear too many people talking about it. I must admit, it slept in my collection for a long time. This is Peace at Last. And this is actually, 1996. This is actually a fine album. I listened to it last night in preparation for the video. It's probably not as distinctive as Hats and Walking Along the Rooftops. It's more acoustic. They've got an acoustic drummer on there. I suppose it sounds more natural. If you're not a sort of fan of the kind of 80s production, you might actually prefer to start with this one. His vocals are still fantastic. There's some really nice songs on here, but a big gap. Don't really know why they left such huge gaps between their records. I mean, they're famous for it really, aren't they? They did a 4th record after this. I don't remember what the gap was between those two, but again, it was a bit of a gap, and that's all they've done in all these decades is 4, I think it's 4 records, but 7 years between Hats and this one, Peace at Last. Check that out if you've not heard it. And then also tying in 7th place, he had to turn up, didn't he? We've got Bob Dylan. And so with this, actually I'm showing the wrong record. This is the one that I meant to pull, Under a Red Sky, which I think came out in 1990. I was at uni when this came out and I heard it the year of its release. In fact, it was one of the first Bob Dylan records I ever heard. Oh Mercy was the first, and then this one came out next, so it's the next one I heard. I'm quite fond of this record. It gets a very bad press. But I think this was during a period where Bob was really suffering from writer's block. For some reason, he'd just lost his mojo. He had got it back with Oh Mercy. He discovered a new way of writing songs, working with Daniel Lanois in New Orleans. But then he got writer's block again, and then essentially disappeared for 7 years as a songwriter. He did put out 2 records of kind of folky cover versions, so we don't really count them as being proper Bob Dylan records. Even though they are proper Bob Dylan records, but they're not original material. So the next one he put out was in 1997, and of course, again, a collaboration with Daniel Lanois, Time Out of Mind, which was an altogether more moody effort, more kind of monochrome. Very well, highly regarded again, as Oh Mercy had been, so a bit of a return to form. And then this really launched the modern Bob Dylan. I don't remember how many years there were between this one and the next one, but he's been pretty prolific ever since. So this record, I think, on some level, must have represented the floodgates opening again in terms of his inspiration. So yeah, 7 years between Under a Red Sky and Time Out of Mind, and that will do for that. So let's move up the chart now. So a big jump now, big jump from 7 years to 15 years. And interestingly, we've got 2 different artists here and they are related to each other. So let us see what we need to do with this. So let's do George Harrison first. So George Harrison had been quite prolific really since the Beatles broke up. He'd done an album every couple of years, at least 2 or 3 albums where he managed consecutive years. He took a break after Gone Troppo, which was 1983, I think. Came back with Cloud 9, which was the big comeback, really. He teamed up with Jeff Lynne, had a #1 hit single in the US with Got My Mind Set on You. It was quite a sort of unexpected comeback, really, because he had been away for a long time. He tried to play down the comeback angle, but he had been working in the film industry and he kept his head down to a large extent. But Cloud 9 was a big deal for him, really. Of course, coming off the back of that, he got into the Travelling Wilburys project and various other things, but for some reason he decided he wasn't going to follow up the solo thing. And unfortunately, we had to wait 15 years, and we had to wait until George had actually passed away before the subsequent record, Brainwashed, finally came out, which was a set of unfinished recordings, really, which he'd been doing at Friar Park in the intervening years that were touched up, tidied up by Jeff Lynne and Dhani Harrison. Made for quite a fine record, really. My personal view is that it would have been better if George had managed to get it out in his lifetime. I think, you know, in places it sounds a little bit Formula Jeff Lynne, but there's some nice stuff on here. A couple of big favourites for me. Stuck Inside a Cloud, the first song on side 2, is beautiful. Rising Sun, Looking for My Life, Pisces Fish, just some good stuff on this record. Awful cover though, isn't it? But yeah, just a real shame really that George couldn't have seen through to getting it done in his lifetime, but who are we to judge? So that was 15 years. And while we're on the subject of 15 years and George Harrison, we need to look at ELO and Jeff Lynne. So this was the final proper ELO album. Balance of Power came out in 1986. It was the culmination of a period where Jeff Lynne had been under contract to deliver a certain number of records. He didn't really want to do it anymore. He was he was a lot sick and tired of the sound, and he felt he needed to move on. He teamed up with George Harrison, as we've just seen, went off and launched this amazing solo career. Well, a producer's career, I was going to say. He did put out a solo album called Armchair Theatre in 1990, and in fact, strictly speaking, Jeff Lynne should win this because he didn't put out another solo album, Long Wave, until I think it was 20 years later. But I'm not including that because he did put out some ELO stuff in the intervening time, and you know, the name Jeff Lynne and the name ELO are fairly synonymous, really. But really, he should win the prize. But anyway, 1986 for Balance of Power, and then it was 15 years until he finally came out with Zoom, which was really an ELO album in name only. It was a Jeff Lynne solo album pretty much. Didn't do much chart-wise, didn't really have the classic ELO sound on it. Had some okay songs, but the production, I don't think the production was very good on this. He tried to launch a world tour, or a tour of America, I think it was, and had to cancel it because ticket demand was so poor. So that was a shame, but 15 years. And then a few years on from then, of course, he relaunched the Jeff Lynne's ELO, which have done a couple of albums and a live album as well, and have done an amazing business relaunching that name. But between Balance of Power in 86 and Zoom in whatever year it was, my maths is no good, we've got a gap of 15 years. So there we go, bit of ELO and Jeff. Okay, so we're now moving to third place and a gap of 17 years. And this is a band that I've been talking about quite a lot on my channel recently because I've been reviewing their first 5 albums on A&M between the years 1978 and 1982. It's Squeeze, of course. But we're going to jump forward in time now to the final record they did in the 90s, which was Domino. Came out, I think, in 1998 on their own record label, Quixotic Records. They've been ditched by A&M. Things were not going well for them. Commercial success eluding them. Chris Difford and Glenn Tilbrook falling out really badly. Chris Difford descending into alcoholism and addictions of various kinds, had to go into rehab, wasn't able to go on the tour, and essentially the band broke up in a hugely acrimonious way and then didn't come back for many years. They finally resurfaced a new band. In the intervening years, what happened was Glenn Tilbrook formed a band called the Fluffers, and he started writing his own material, as in writing his own lyrics as well as the music. And when Chris and Glenn finally patched it up all those years later, 2015, Glenn said to Chris, why don't we'll just use my band, the Fluffers, we'll rename it Squeeze, and then we'll kind of, relaunch. And this album, Cradle to the Grave, was a TV tie-in. There was a TV show, a comedy drama, I think, written by Danny Baker, who is a comedian in the UK. He and Squeeze go way back. And this album ended up being quite a big hit. In fact, it might even have gone to #1 briefly, or at least top 10. It was the biggest album that they ever made, which is extraordinary, really. After a 17-year gap. 2 years later, they did another album called The Knowledge. So that would have been in 2017. So we're approaching 10 years now since the last Squeeze album. But between Domino and Cradle to the Grave, we have a 17-year gap. And nobody really expected Squeeze to come back after that, but they did. So hurrah for that. Right, so we've got 2 left. In second place, an absolutely wonderful band who I'm a big fan of, even though their discography is incredibly small. An 80s band, a pop band really, indie pop. This is the Lotus Eaters, and this is their album, No Sense of Sin. This is a wonderful album. If you can track down a copy, not easy to find on vinyl. I found this copy from a pet rescue place about 5 years ago for about 50p. Absolutely amazing find. Came out in 1984, and the big hit single from this, which was a big hit all across Europe actually, was The First Picture of You. But the record has got a lot more to it than that. It's just beautiful, windswept, achingly melancholy, happy, sad pop music really, with a real, almost a sort of unearthly shimmer to it. Wonderful vocals from this guy here, whose name escapes me now. A really great voice, a really great album. Don't know why they were not able to follow up from that, but it took many years, 17 years. And I'm going to guess that there are some people watching this video who maybe are not even aware that the Lotus Eaters finally reconvened and made this record. It's called Silent Space. I've just got it on CD. Came out in 2001, and this is a wonderful record as well. I listened to it again in preparation for doing the video, and I really enjoyed it. Less of an 80s sound, I suppose, more of a modern music kind of sound, slightly flat in places, has that flat production sound in places that modern music has, but still some wonderful songs, really beautiful stuff on here, and his voice sounds exactly the same after all those years. I should have said actually Squeeze or another one, 17-year gap between Domino and Cradle to the Grave. Glenn Toolbrook's voice didn't change at all in the intervening time, and same for the Lotus Eaters. Now after this record, apparently they agreed that they were going to do another couple of albums. They said they wanted to get another 2 records out within a couple of years of making this one, but we're still waiting. Okay, so we've reached the #1 slot. Who is it that took a grand total of 19 years to release an album? I shall reveal it now. One of my favourite artists of all time, and somebody that I talk about quite a lot on this channel. It is, of course, the great Thomas Dolby, who had a pop career in the 1980s, had a couple of fair hit singles, Hyperactive, She Blinded Me with Science, made a name for himself as a kind of boffin-y, madcap scientist kind of figure. It was a shame really, because the stuff that was successful for him was novelty singles really, and he never managed to really carve a big audience for himself as an albums artist. He put out 5 really nice albums in the 1980s. The final one of which was this, Astronauts and Heretics, which actually I think might have come out in 1991. And this is a wonderful album. It's very rootsy, but it's also got that Thomas Dolby sheen to it. An absolutely genius, brilliant producer. Some great guest appearances on this record. You've got Eddie Reader, you've got the 2 guys from The Grateful Dead, Bob Weir and Jerry Garcia, pop up on guitar. Eddie Van Halen does a really scorching guitar solo on this record, on the track Eastern Bloc. It's a really fine record. But Dolby, he just got frustrated really. Lack of record company support. He just wasn't able to cross over enough into the mainstream. Formed a very ardent core fan following, which he still has to this day. But essentially, he just was not able to make ends meet, in that respect. So he went off and spent 19 years, not in the wilderness. He went off to Silicon Valley and became a very important person, really. He ended up innovating the polyphonic ringtone for mobile phones. So, yeah, strange story. But of course, in the intervening years, music fans didn't really know what he was doing, what was happening. And then finally, he popped back into view in 2011 with this quite good record, actually, Map of the Floating City. Some really strong material on here. It has a slightly flat laptop-y production, which again, quite a lot of modern music has, but there's some still really, really good songs on this record. If you haven't heard it and you're a Dolby fan from back in the day, I would recommend checking this out. And he did relaunch himself with this. He did a tour, there was a live album, which is actually worth hearing, I've got that. And then in more recent times, he's back on the circuit again. I went to see him last year, and he was fantastic. He's had a hair transplant now, so he's back to his old self. But to my knowledge, there's been no plans recently that I've read about him doing any more records. But I'm really hoping he doesn't leave it 19 years between this one and the next one. But anyway, he wins the first prize really for that gap. 19 years between Astronauts and Heretics and A Map of the Floating City. So there we go. That concludes my list. So hope you enjoyed it. There have been a few responses to this, so have a little look around. You'll probably find some other people popping up in your feed now that I've done this. But hope you enjoyed my selection. Check out the original video, Careful with the Axe Eugene. I will link it in the description below. Really good idea for a video. Enjoyed putting this together, so thanks very much. And I shall see you all soon. Take care. Bye for now.